Colleagues, as an inveterate city girl, I take to this inquiry on cities like a duck to water, and I'm delighted to swim into Senator Simons' inquiry, which calls the attention of the Senate to the challenges and opportunities that Canadian municipalities face, and to the importance of understanding and redefining the relationship between Canada's municipalities and the federal government. For reasons we all understand, we rarely speak about cities in this chamber, and I would like to thank Senator Simons for opening up the space for us to do so. Cities create a hum in the air, and it is this hum of endless activity that has always attracted me to them. Big city, bright lights, anonymity, everything that is on offer has drawn me to live in New Delhi, Munich, Tehran, Toronto, and now occasionally Ottawa. My colleagues who live in, let's say, more bucolic parts of Canada, Senator Duncan, I'm looking at you, Senator Black, at you, will certainly have a different point of view, and I respect that. But for me, cities is where the action is, and no wonder. I come from one of the most diverse and vibrant cities in Canada, and indeed in the world. The energy, the pace, the food, the culture, the sports helps leapfrog Toronto high on every ranking of cities, not just in Canada, but globally. I confess I'm a bit biased, but I'm not so biased that I don't appreciate the glorious waterfront in Halifax, the music and laughs in Montreal, the Stampede of Calgary, although I have never been to it, it's on my bucket list, Stanley Park in Vancouver, and of course, the political chatter on the street in Ottawa. My time on this matter is brief, so I will take the opportunity of showcasing the unique capacity of cities to create innovative, place-based solutions to seemingly intractable national and global problems. Solutions which can far easily be adapted from city to city with far less angst, process, debate, and conflict than it takes national governments to do to adopt good ideas from elsewhere. And in order to make my case for a greater role for cities in our arrangements, I am going to pick a case study, that of climate change, and for good reason. We all know the threat that climate change presents to us, not just in cities, but across our nation and the world. But the sheer density of life in cities means that they will be at the forefront of rising global mean temperature. It is predicted by National Resources Canada that as the global mean temperature continues to rise, cities and towns across Canada will experience warmer temperatures, shifting precipitation patterns, increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, and for most coastal cities, a rise in sea level. This is neither hyperbolic nor futuristic. We all know that. We have already witnessed chaos because of extreme weather last year in British Columbia, and we are going to see more, not less, of acute and chronic biophysical impacts, including more and frequent intense heat, increased incidences of poor air quality, high-intensity rainfall events, windstorms, wildlife-urban interface fires, increased coastal erosion, storm surge flooding, and decreased water quality. Sounds almost apoplectic, but this is a fact. Let's just remember the fires in Fort McMurray. 2,400 homes and buildings were destroyed, and thousands of residents were forcibly displaced. The estimated damage of this tragic event was over $9 billion, which is the costliest disaster in Canadian history. From fire, let's turn to water, namely seawater. One of the most commonly known impacts of climate change is rising sea levels. This will impact our coastline and therefore our coastal cities. Vancouver and Victoria could see significant landmarks and areas underwater, beloved civic spaces like the H.R. Macmillan Space Centre, the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia, Fisherman's Wharf Park, and BC Place could all be underwater. And this is not limited just to our coastal cities. Non-coastal cities could be impacted by rising sea levels as well. Quebec City, which is close to the St. Lawrence River, could see parts of the city underwater from increased flooding in the summer. Toronto, too, would be impacted with warmer and wetter winters and summers. And this could lead to flooding, which in turn will damage our physical infrastructure, because city infrastructure was not designed for climate change. It is no longer fit for purpose. But cities are not ignoring the reality that stares them in the face. In fact, cities are leading the charge for solutions with innovation and ingenuity, as David Miller, former mayor of Toronto and now city's climate activist, has noted. Time magazine observed, countries brought big promises to COP, but cities brought action. And the actions of cities matter a great deal because 70% of greenhouse emissions are created by urban areas. The most encouraging sign is that most forward-looking cities have embedded climate change into urban planning processes. And the results are impressive. And to whet your appetite a bit, I'm going to take you for a quick tasting tour of who, where, and what. Vancouver is now dedicated to turning itself into a city for walking and cycling, much like Amsterdam. This includes a complete rethink of transportation, land use, and urban planning so that cars are less and less a feature of city life. By 2030, 90% of the people living within the city will be an easy walk or roll to their daily needs. The rolling sort of grabs my imagination. I have to go back to Vancouver sometime. Montreal has adopted strong climate change plans that are backed heavily by City Council and civil society. And one key plank is to have strict energy efficiency standards for new construction in the city. And it is already planning the establishment of a zero-carbon neighborhood near the old Hippodrome horse racing track. Toronto has recently adopted Transform TO, an ambitious climate change strategy. They have begun enforcing a new set of green standards for the buildings, which will tighten the rules around greenhouse emissions for new and existing buildings. I could give you examples from Bridgewater and Halifax and suburban cities like Brampton and Ajax in Ontario, if I had time. But I do want to go beyond Canadian cities because we do not live in Canada alone. We live as part of the globe. Let me give you a very quick tour of the exciting things other cities in the world are doing. Oslo has adopted a green budget. Instead of looking only at financial analysis, it requires a carbon impact analysis and a budget to meet those challenges. Bogota has gone on a bike lane building spree. Barcelona has banned cars from entire supercity blocks. Milan is being transformed into an urban forest. In Chicago, rooftop gardens and greenery have become the norm, reducing rooftop temperatures by 3 to 4 degrees Celsius. London is issuing green bonds for rewilding. But colleagues, I must tell you, the coolest ideas come from Canada. Vancouver is making buildings, really big buildings, entirely out of wood. And Toronto is cooling its downtown office buildings, not by expensive, energy-intensive chillers, but by piping Lake Ontario water and cooling it through an efficient system. I believe that these are signals of focus, innovation, and ingenuity. And I've always believed that good ideas have long legs. And many of these ideas are being replicated across cities. But no matter how creative these solutions are, they cannot solve or resolve the challenge without the participation of other orders of government, in particular the federal government. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities has a sensible three-point plan. They call on the government to bring its whole self to the table through three actions. One, rapid scaling of support for disaster mitigation and climate resilience, including wildfire mitigation, drought reduction, and flood prevention. Two, strengthening natural infrastructure so that municipalities can purchase forests, wetlands, and green spaces. How brilliant is that? Three, supporting cities by updating natural hazard plans, maps, updating regional climate mapping, and undertaking risk assessments to integrate social and equity considerations. Colleague, I think these are all reasonable asks. And of course, they are accompanied by money, lots of money. But success will evade us if we continue to follow the narrow dictates of business as usual and stay in our lanes and corridors. The federal government must be able to talk to municipalities, and municipalities must be able to talk to the federal government and build relationships. As Jane Jacobs has said, the level of government closest to the people has the capacity to respond fastest to its needs. But it is the level of government furthest from the people, in this case the federal government, that has the capacity and indeed the responsibility to provide protection to the people, whether this protection comes in the form of human rights laws, security protection, or in this case, protection from the looming threat of climate change. Cities and the federal government must be more in the same room together, must create space for each other at each other's tables. And there are already points of light. I'm an eternal optimist, so I will share with you some points of light that I have picked up. The federal government recently launched, about recently, always a relative term in Parliament, about 2 years ago, launched a municipal nominee program to enable municipalities to choose their own immigrants according to their own needs. The gas tax, when it was introduced, had municipalities in mind. 3 years ago, the federal government reached out to the city of Toronto for special funding to house refugees. And the taxes collected through the price on carbon are directly refunded by the federal government to schools and hospitals, colleges, municipalities, and universities. So I will conclude by saying that we need many more of these good ideas and many more conversations and actions between levels of government to deal with this ever-present and growing crisis. All this can happen, colleagues, without straying too far into the constitutional arrangements of our nation. But it will take public and political will to do so. So I am pleased that Senator Simons has created the space in the Senate to start this conversation. Thank you, Senator.